The Princess and the Pea. Once upon a time, long, long ago, there was a girl called Bethany Gwaine. She had grown up in a loving family. They were not too rich and not too poor. Her dad, Bill, was a swordsmith, and her mum, Rachel, was a teacher, and they lived just outside the palace gates. I should mention that Bill and Rachel were not Bethany's actual parents. They had been unable to have children of their own, and when a young couple in ragged clothes turned up on their doorstep 16 years before, they had been kind enough to take her in. It wasn't supposed to be forever, but Bethany's parents disappeared, and she had lived with Bill and Rachel ever since. And although Bethany wondered about her real mum and dad, she felt very lucky to be with such lovely people, and Bill and Rachel felt lucky too. One stormy night, Bethany's parents were away traveling to visit Grandma Gwaine in the next town when there was a thunderous rainstorm. Not such a big deal, you might think, but that night the rain was unusually heavy, and it started to pour through the modest roof of their modest home. Now, Bethany did her best to plug the holes, but it was no use. Despite lining up all the buckets in the house, pretty soon the front room was knee-deep in rainwater. "This is no use," she said, and being a smart girl, decided that her only hope of a dry night's sleep was to call on her neighbors. So she put on her raincoat and hat and walked through town, knocking on every door. But no one opened up. It was so late, and everyone was either fast asleep or the rain was too loud for anyone to hear her. Finally, she reached the palace, and with nowhere else to go, she huddled in the shelter of the huge doorway to stay dry until morning. Bethany was hugging herself to stay warm when the palace door opened. A small woman in a nightgown, holding a candle, called out to her from the darkness. "My dear," said the lady, "you're soaked through. Please come in to warm yourself by the fire." "Thank you for your kindness," said Bethany, the rain dripping down her head and soaking her wet clothes. "Once the rain stops, I'll be able to go home." "Of course," said the woman, smiling. "Here, take this blanket." "Thank you. I'm Bethany. I am Mrs. Williamson, the palace housekeeper. Now let me get you some hot chocolate." They sat together for a while by the open fire, and then Bethany was shown to a large bedroom and given a towel and some nightclothes. "Now, if there's anything you need, dear, please ring the bell." "Thank you. Good night, Mum." Bethany got ready and then climbed into the huge four-poster bed. It was warm and cozy, and she was ready to fall asleep. But for some reason, she just couldn't get comfortable. Not wanting to wake Mrs. Williamson again, she looked in the cupboard and found some extra blankets and placed them on the mattress. She tried again to get to sleep, but something about the bed just wasn't right. She added blanket after blanket, and another until the bed was piled high. "Hopefully that will be enough," she thought to herself. The next morning, as the sun rose, Mrs. Williamson went to Bethany's room to wake her, and found her fast asleep, not in the bed, but lying on a single blanket on the floor. "My dear," she said, "the bed wasn't comfortable? I just couldn't get to sleep. I hope you don't mind." "Not at all," said the housekeeper. "Now off to the kitchen. The cook will fix you some breakfast." While Bethany ate breakfast, Mrs. Williamson stripped the sheets off the bed, and there, under the very bottom of the mattress, was a single pea. I wonder," said Mrs. Williamson to herself. Bethany was just finishing her toast when who should enter the kitchen with Mrs. Williamson but the King and Queen. Bethany stopped chewing, her mouth wide open in shock. "Close your mouth, dear," said Mrs. Williamson with a smile. Bethany closed her mouth, but she couldn't believe her eyes. The king and queen standing there in the same room, close enough to touch. The queen was whispering in the king's ear. Finally, she stepped forward. "My dear, Bethany, is it?" "Uh-huh," said Bethany, still in shock. "Mrs. Williamson said you didn't sleep well last night." Bethany nodded. "I'm sorry to hear that. It seems this was in your bed." The queen held up the pea that Mrs. Williamson had found under the mattress. "May I ask how old you are, my dear?" Bethany took a moment to remember her age. "At 16, Ma'am." The queen took a sharp breath. Then Bethany heard Mrs. Williamson whisper to the king, "Notice her eyes, sire, and the shape of her nose." Bethany touched her nose. The king stepped forwards. "Young Bethany, please excuse us, but the thing is, you see, many years ago our daughter was stolen from the castle in the middle of the night. She was a mere infant, a babe in arms. However, we have always held out hope because a wise woman gave a prophecy that one day our princess would return." "Yes," added the queen, and began to recite the prophecy. "On a night like no other, when storms rage and she has come of age, she will arrive at your door, be offered great comfort, yet choose the floor." The king nodded slowly. "We never knew what this meant, but since that day, we placed a single pea just like this under the mattress of every spare bed. The wise woman said that no one but the true princess would know it was there." Bethany could not believe what she was hearing. Could it be that she was the princess? The next day, Bethany welcomed her parents home to a house flooded with water. They were so upset, but she was smiling from ear to ear, and they could not understand it. Her dad quickly set about to mend the roof, but Bethany stopped him, and instead asked them both to walk with her to the palace gates. There they were met by the king and queen, who told their story of how their daughter had been taken all those years ago. Then they asked that Bethany and her mum and dad would all move into the castle and live with them there. They agreed, and from that day on, Bethany, Brian, Rachel, the king and the queen became a family, a rather strange-shaped one, but a family nonetheless. So the next time something seems like it's going wrong in your life, like Bethany's leaky roof, or perhaps something not quite so dramatic, try to remember that it isn't the end of your story. It might be the first step to a beautiful, happy ending.